If wishes were horses, then beggars would ride. If turnips were swords, I'd have one at my side. If ifs and ands were pots and pans, there'd be no work for tinkers' hands.
Hello, and welcome to episode 15 of the Replimat, a occasional, sometimes regular meander through the world of Deep Space Nine with a newcomer
Me, Tim, hello.
and an oldster who's watched it many times, me, Andy. Today we're doing episode 15 of season 1 of DS9, which is If Wishes Were Horses, which was first transmitted on May the 16th, 1993, quite a while ago. And it was teleplayed by Neil McHugh Crawford and William L. Crawford and Michael Piller. Bit few, isn't it? Story by Nell. Oh, sorry, not Neil. Nell, my bad.
Yeah.
Nell McHugh Crawford and William L. Crawford. Directed by Robert Legato. Okie dokie. So, Tim, as the new Niner, Niner being the term for fans of this show,
Right.
apparently, this will make sense in season 7.
Okay.
Yeah, eventually this will make sense to you. So, yes, initial thought.
Yeah, it was a very enjoyable episode.
You did
I
seem
have
to be, you did laugh quite a bit. So,
I did
yeah,
laugh. Yeah.
trollops.
There were a number of really kind of icky moments towards the start, but
Uh-huh.
that actually they were rewarded nicely by
hmm
what transpired afterwards. It was very much, in my view, it was very much like a classic with a small c, Star Trek
Yeah.
episode. Is what my perception is as a non fan. My perception of what a classic or classical Star Trek episode is. Something strange happens that there's a potential explanation for it. They spend a lot of time investigating that. There's some guest stars, beings or whatever that are interacting with the crew, and you're not quite sure, what their agenda is, and then someone potentially kind of takes something of a leap of faith at the end, and everything's sorted again. So it was. I may be doing the series a huge disservice, but that tends to be sort of my
Well,
uh,
no, you're not
my
wrong.
uneducated perception of what of a sort of classic Star Trek episode plot, whatever.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. I think it is very classic Trek, at least as you say, perceived idea of such. The idea that you say mystery, strange aliens who have odd powers and it's a bit surreal, and which is some of that TOS certainly did fairly often. Next Gen less so, and DS9 very less so eventually. So yeah, this is definitely in that mode and very atypical of DS9. It's actually
Hmm.
not dissimilar, I was thinking, especially when we got to the end of it, to the Q story that they did.
Right.
The,
Yes.
the kind of threat was external, but obviously connected to what was going on, and is all, you know, yeah, it's a little
And possibly
similar.
that move along home
Yeah,
as well, because
yeah,
it's
because that was quite
at the
surreal and
end you've got, and actually there's no
real
or the
threat.
perceived threat isn't actually
Yeah,
a threat really at the end
it's
anyway.
just
So
what they think's the threat turns out not
people
so
messing
much.
around, yeah,
Yeah.
aliens messing around. So
Okay, let's get to the Grizzly because I know you've got thoughts on this. I just know from your reaction when watching that particular stuff was like,
yes,
which
I
made
don't
me
want to
chuckle
see that.
because I knew this was coming, um, and I think my view might be a wee bit different on yours on this one. But
Okay.
I think at the end we're probably on the same page though. So come on, let people know what you thought of this particular thread.
Oh well, yes, the whole Doctor and
Yeah,
his
yeah,
and his
absolutely that. Uh-huh.
imagined
The
uh,
fantasy Dax.
fantasy Dax. That's it.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. Um,
Mm.
the I mean, it started off with the whole sort of pre-credits stuff with them having dinner, and I just
Your
I
face.
I hate to see someone desperate like that. And I'm not saying that it's not realistic, but I just I yeah, I feel very sorry for people who come across as very desperate, and he was
But you're
definitely
right though.
a
It
doctor
was.
in despair.
I think it was quite realistic because I've seen people like that that obviously have got a thing for somebody that's not
Yeah,
being requited at all, and they can't
you could,
help but bring it up in conversation all the time,
yeah, but you're going to
and
ruin a
almost
professional.
unaware of how awful they're coming across.
Yeah,
And yeah, but I like how Dax is kind of bemused by it all. You know, 'cause she was a young man once.
he's very lucky that she reacts the way
Oh God,
she does,
yes. I mean,
because
yeah,
it's yeah. It's a sort of situation that could ruin a professional relationship.
yeah. It could destroy any
Um,
potential friendship too.
yeah,
Really.
exactly. And just yeah. So that was, I suppose, that scene. Although it was uncomfortable or awkward to watch, it was then rewarded later
Mm.
in the whole sort of double Dax
Double Dax.
situation,
Yeah,
which
a
I'm sure
bit
was
too
great fun
doctories,
for her.
wasn't it?
Very,
It's a bit like
it must have
the
been great fun.
doctors. It's a bit like the two doctors meeting each other in Doctor Who.
Yes,
They can't get on because they're different aspects of the same character. It's like,
yes.
yeah.
And it must have been great fun for Terry Farrell to perform.
What I find
She's a very great laugh.
curious, it seems to me that there should have been two end scenes possibly. You got the Cisco one where you learn what the threat is, not the threat. You learn what the aliens' raison d'etre is, who they are, and a promise of a sequel,
Yes,
which is interesting because I kind of forgot about that.
they did that a lot. They've done that a lot in this first
Yeah,
series.
I think they are a lot of edging their bets to see what lands, to see what they can follow up on, and
Yeah,
yeah. But it seems to me that what's missing also another wrap up. Maybe I would say actually after the Cisco one would fit because it was there at the beginning. Is a
mm.
follow up scene with Dax and Bashir to actually see where they're both at now. Where she's
Yeah,
like, now you understand, and he's hopefully at the point where he's like, yeah, okay, what I thought I wanted, I didn't actually want at all. So
yes.
they seem like
Needed some kind of
it needed that
closure.
resolution a bit, didn't it? Even
Yeah,
though this is obviously a type of series that can pick threads up later because they're stationary, so it's definitely going to be elements of that. Yeah, it does seem for this episode, for anybody who just watched this episode on its own, because at this point in the series you can probably do that quite a
mm.
bit. I think it was missing that little resolution for that plot thread. 'Cause you didn't need the
Yeah.
one with O'Brien and Keiko because that wasn't a big thread necessarily.
No, the,
Um,
if you were going to have a follow up scene with Bashir and Dax, the end of this episode was definitely the time to
yeah,
have it. If you
because they,
pick it up in another episode, you've lost that whole you've lost the whole emotional
hmm.
investment that the audience have put in.
Well, it's
Uh,
that, and obviously, as I say, because it's not, it hasn't quite become a serialized show just yet.
mm,
It's definitely slowly leaning into it, where it's beginning to realize they can follow things on in places. They haven't quite fully embraced it yet. So yeah, this bear in mind that at this point it seems DS9 is still very much monster of the week, story of the week kind of thing. yeah, it did feel like this particular episode needed that resolution for this plot thread because, as you say, to pick it up later, especially specifically connected to this, you've lost the momentum, you lost emotional hook,
Yeah.
and certainly if it's a casual viewer just picked up this episode, I imagine they'd be like, "Hang on, there's no consequence, there's nothing discussed," because
Yeah.
it's not. They just had a little brief convo among the group at the end when they all disappear, and just let me know if anything happens in the next 26 hours, and nothing else.
Yeah.
Nothing else apart from Cisco. But yeah, curious. I personally, I'm I kind of like this episode for the Bashir thing because I mean, as I've said to you, I completely understand what you're coming from in the earlier parts of the season, and
Yeah.
it does a bit
He's
itchy.
genuinely not that bad anymore already.
No,
Already.
he's definitely evolved as a character,
Yes.
and I like, in a very classical way, that when he did get what he wanted, you very much like, oh, hang on, what? Why am I resisting? This is exactly what I want, but because obviously in his head, as his stack says, submissive is kind of what he wanted from her in some way, you know, which you know, a lot of relationships are like that where they're unbalanced, where one is more submissive than the other. I mean, the best are those that aren't like that, I think, but obviously this is the 90s, and as a culture being reflected in Star Trek, it hasn't quite reached the point where people are a bit more equal, I suppose. Although obviously
Yeah.
women's rights were much better in the 90s, it's still, well, as we said last week, it's a show written pretty much by men.
Yes.
So that kind of leaning is, certainly in season one, is still very much there,
Yeah.
intentionally or otherwise. But yeah, I like this. I like the Dax and Bashir thing. I think it kind of worked. It moved their characters forward a lot. It didn't move
Yeah.
Dax forward much because Dax has been quite bemused by it all since day one. Really, she's been
Yeah. But
very
it
unbothered by it all.
it allowed Dax to sort of reiterate her bemusement about the whole thing. So
But it gave Bashir a chance to realise this is not she's not who he wants her to be.
yeah.
Which, yeah, without that resolution, it's a shame, isn't it?
It is.
It loses
Definitely a
something.
missed opportunity. And yeah, although there were sort of icky moments along the way, I tend to agree with you that the Dax Bashir situation was well handled in the episode overall, and and I take away from that it's moved on.
Yeah,
Um,
well, I
and
forget, but I suspect it is by this. I think this is pretty
I think that's
much
good.
it. They've done it now, so they can move on.
Yeah.
Now they've begun to realise who these characters are as writers too. They can actually finally move forward in this.
There's something you mentioned along the way, which hadn't occurred to me until that point, but it was certainly very apt. Is that there was no B plot this episode?
No,
It
there
carried
wasn't, was
itself. It carried itself along with the eight. With well,
Yeah.
I suppose potentially you've got an A, B, and C plot that all feed into one large, or a C, D, and E, B, C, and D plot that feed into the large A plot. Anyway, because you've got the baseball player, and you've got the submissive, overly amorous Dax, and you've got Rumpelstiltskin. But they are all aspects of the main A plot, and then
Yeah.
it's only later when you see them conversing. that
Yeah,
you
and the
think
B
something
plot is kind of the external threat.
underhand might be might be on the cards, but yeah, there wasn't room in the episode for anything else. So
Not really. And even the
and it-
B plot, if you want to call it that, which would be the external threat, was obviously very much part of this story anyway.
yeah,
It was actually part of the A plot. It
There
literally
was
turns out it was as much of a figment, more as much of a wish, because obviously we don't always wish for good things, you
no,
know.
this is true. Yeah,
When you think wish, you assume in the head it comes with the image of what the most you want the best of, but it's also you kind of wish something doesn't happen, and in this case these things were happening.
yeah,
So even the B plot wasn't really a B plot because the threat was just an extension of it again,
yeah.
which is quite nice actually.
It was quite refreshing as well that there
Mm.
was so much going on that it didn't that you didn't need other character moments. Something ticking along in the background. Um, and I suppose taking the Bashir Dax relationship or situation, that in terms of what's progressing the series and the character narratives and the story arcs overall,
Mm.
it's been fulfilled by that
Yeah, for sure.
in the episode anyway. So certainly I think certainly much more effectively than the Bashir O'Brien situation in that
The one that you
dreadful one
loved
two
so
weeks
much
ago.
2 weeks ago, yeah,
Yeah,
because you
exactly.
adored that.
So
It's funny. I
that's
always liked that episode till we watched together. And I kind of see what you're saying. It's a bit rubbish, isn't it?
it's yeah. So yeah, I think there's you can identify uh, a progression
Mm.
for the main characters overall.
Yeah.
From
Speaking
the
of,
story.
it was nice to see Ben, Cisco actually involved because
Yeah,
it feels like he's only been a guest spot for a little while now. So it's nice to see him actually participate in the plot.
yeah,
Not
and to come up with
centrally
the resolution
necessarily,
as well.
but hmm?
And to come up with the resolution as well.
Well,
That was
yeah,
his.
he
I
worked it
mean,
out.
it shows he's quite, he's stoically there at the head of everything, and how everyone else is reacting to stuff, and
It's
he's
working it out.
kind of got the clarity
Mm.
to think, hang on, no, let's stop. We're not going to, O'Brien is not going to sell his daughter to Rumpelstiltskin.
Nope, oddly enough.
So yeah,
His 1.5, 2-year-old daughter, who's clearly like 4 or 5. Um, Speaking of Cisco and his clarity and his reason and whatnot, what I did quite enjoy the juxtaposition in those last few scenes in particular is how Kira's so out of her element because this is not the world she's inhabited.
yes,
Not at all. She's like, what the hell is going on? None of this makes any sense. You can see she's
yeah.
like, is this the crap you Starfleet types deal with? I mean, what's going on?
So does that mean potentially that the Bajorans don't have an imagination?
Well, no, she did, because remember, she had that pylon explosion
Oh,
thing.
she did. Yeah, the fire and
Because, of
stuff.
course, the threat externally was obviously weighing on her head, I
Yeah,
guess. And that manifested in a pylon going, and of course, somebody apparently dying. But she got over that very quickly
yeah,
with a
she did.
tricorder that she just happened to have on her. I thought that was quite, as you know, when I was watching
It
it.
was gone when she came back to the bridge.
Yeah, no, it's funny because they're in a little meeting, and like I said, she was like, Kira never wears a tricorder. It's not really her thing. Why is she wearing it? So I think she's going to like take it out during the meeting, but no, she leaves the room, leaves ops, comes down to one of the pylons, and suddenly she needs it.
Yeah.
Which at least she had it for the next previous 2 scenes, so it wasn't randomly there in the turbo lift.
Yes, exactly.
But it's like, and then when she returns to the bridge, it's suddenly gone because like it's not really a Kira thing at all. She doesn't do this. Let
She
me
doesn't
take a
try
few
chord.
readings. It's not her thing, is it? So yeah, it's a bit odd that she just happened to have it on her.
Yeah,
I mean, a bit
but
as a
yes, it
plot
was
convenient.
it was a nice kind of juxtaposition the way
Mm.
that yeah she was. What the
She's completely
hell
like,
have you
what the freaking
brought?
frick's going on here? Oh, I've got to show you this. You can see in the background before we continue because it's nice to have sides. This wee thing.
Oh yeah, that's been bugging me the whole time. I've been looking at it thinking, I wonder what that is.
Who do you recognise? Oh, oh.
I recognise Cisco in the middle. and I recognise Bashir, Odo. I recognise Worf. I recognise Kira at the bottom and Quark. I don't recognise the bloke between Worf and Kira,
Wolf
and
and
I don't
Kira?
recognise.
Really? That's
Oh,
Jake.
is it?
Yeah.
Oh, so it is. Oh, I see it now. Um,
This is
I don't.
a
I don't know
novelization
the.
of the finale, hence
Oh,
why they
okay.
all look somewhat different and
Yeah, I don't know the.
why Jake looks so much older.
Is is that so? Is that Dax with short hair?
Yes.
Okay.
That I'm not saying. But I'm not lying by saying yes.
Okay.
Oops, it's not going to stand up now. Meh.
So so what's that? Is that Blu-ray?
No, that was a book. It's a
Oh, it's a book.
novelization of the series finale because
Oh, okay.
they used to do such things. Yeah, the old shows used to. Well, I mean, that era of Star Trek used to novelize the big stories like the
Yeah.
opening, the finale. If
Okay.
they like crossover events, like say in Next Gen when Scotty turns up, they novelise that. When Spock turned up, they novelised that. In Voyager, they novelised, which I'd forgotten about, but I saw it online recently. They novelised the episode when Sulu appears. So I
Oh,
might
okay.
actually get that because the episode's awful. I watched it the other day.
Definitely
I'm
have to see that
like,
one.
it's to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Star Trek, so I can see why they did it. But it's also because it's basically set the flashback stuff. It's called flashback. It's set during Star Trek Six, which was the last of the original series films,
Yeah.
and the conceit is that Tuvok was serving with Captain Sulu in that film. We just didn't see him, but it's a weird one because it centers around the death of one of the bridge officers on the Excelsior, who isn't actually dead by the end of Undiscovered Country. So it's
Right.
like you've killed him off. You've made this a central point of this episode, but he doesn't actually die in Undiscovered Country. He's there behind Sulu on the bridge when they all say goodbye. It's a weird episode. They really dropped the ball on that.
Yeah.
But discontinuity. It's I suppose makes these shows more fun for us fans of us viewers because we can spot these things and go,
Got that
look
wrong.
out for these things. I'm sure there'll be lots of that kind of nonsense in DS9 that go along stuff. You're like, hang on a minute, didn't they once say what's going on here? But yeah, back to this particularly surprisingly better than you expected episode from what I was alluding to. Hey,
I don't know. I'm not really sure what I expected actually. I tend to come into these to each of these episodes without any preconceptions. I'm always happy to be either pleasantly surprised or and generally I am in the main pleasantly surprised. There's only a few times where I've just thought, oh god, this is
what is this
bollocks.
nonsense? In this episode, as you noticed, it was about halfway. I just checked the time on it. I'm thinking, God, we've got another 20 minutes of this. And I'm thinking, because I haven't seen this episode for a while, clearly. And I'm like, what more can they possibly do at this point? And as it turned out, not a lot really.
No, but
It's
I
just
didn't
much
feel it
more of the
dragged
same.
at any point. I never felt it dragged at any point.
No.
That was no, not at all. I like the way it. I like the way. I felt it was well paced throughout. I can see what you mean that there wasn't. After a certain point, there wasn't necessarily anything new to add.
Yeah.
I suppose potentially other than just seeing the imagined characters interacting with each other.
Yeah.
But yeah, just I mean, I mentioned when we were watching it. There was when Bashir got angry with his imagined Dax, she disappeared.
Yeah, and you're like, what?
Has she gone? Maybe that's a a clue to getting rid of them. What when she then reappeared, I felt it lost its impact because you didn't see her reappear.
So she just turns up when
walked
they're having that
into the scene as
conversation.
if she was
Yeah.
already there, and so I from a first time viewer perspective, I thought I would have liked to have seen her reappear to
Yeah.
know that she was back.
Well, the only reason she went away presumably was because obviously they're all there trying to get some connection to understand them in it, and
Yeah, she'd lost the connection, hadn't she?
yeah,
So,
because he kind of stopped believing in her, I guess, for a brief spell until he was with Dax again, and then obviously his thoughts wandered clearly, and submissive Dax came back because Dax wasn't being nice enough to him, I guess. But yeah, so Cisco, I like the whole baseball thing. I like that he was treating this guy as the genuine article,
I'm assuming that
Buckeye.
wasn't a real baseball player.
No, the
Because,
London Kings were an invented team for an episode of Next Gen back in season one.
right,
I
I just
believe,
wondered whether they'd been a bit clever and brought in a player from the 80s or the 90s or whatever.
no, and Buckeye, there has been, you may actually, I seem to, wasn't, was this season when the first time we had Jake and Nog doing their thing, they were trying to get a baseball card for Cisco, wasn't that early this season? I seem to recall something similar,
Oh, right.
possibly, or maybe that's a bit later. But the
Nothing
card, either way, I know
springs to
there's
mind. It
definitely
has been
been
a while.
there's definitely been a trading card of Buckeye that's been mentioned or seen previously to this, and they took a photo of one of their production people, and of course then they cast somebody who looked very like him deliberately. Or they say, "Oh, it's just coincidental. We just chose a good actor." It's like, yeah, of course you did. Why wouldn't you chose good actor who happens to look the same or
Yeah.
similar? Because that's kind of the whole point. So yeah, he's an invented character, invented team as well. That's
Yeah.
just been a running gag. I may be mistaken, possibly, but I think there's a early episode of mid episode of Next Gen where this he's this collector dude, and he's got like a mint trading card of. I don't know. I might be wrong, but I think that might be Buckeye on that. Or it might be a completely different one. I forget. But either way, this is not didn't come out of left field, and it is absolutely created.
Mm.
Speaking of Cisco, I know
Mm.
Jake wasn't a huge part of this, but he was, well, kind of the instigator for the whole Buckeye thing anyway. What I another I see this all the time, and I'm sure I've mentioned this a few times as well. But in this episode again, I love the bit when Buckeye comes there and he's trying to convince Jake to let's go play, even though
Yeah.
Jake got homework to do. And Jake's like, I can't because my dad will kill me. And I've got to do my homework first. Yeah, but you're thinking of wanting to play. Yeah, I know I want to play, but I've got homework to do. What I loved about that little scene, and it's true of pretty much every scene when you get Sirach and Avery Brooks together, Ben and Jake, is that you absolutely believe the relationship.
Mm.
You actually really believe that Jake is written as a genuine kid of 13, 12, what he's supposed to be. When I was watching that scene, I was thinking, it made me think back to a comment from Gates McFadden in one of the recent Shutterpod shows I was watching. Link up there, because I can do that, because I've worked this out now. Um, as you may have noticed if you watched it back, the last one. No?
Not all of it.
Oh, not all of it. Well, I've worked out to get that little scrolly thing where you get the link, you want it up, and that will be
Cool.
up over there. So I
Nice.
can do that now. I'm pointing to the right way because I know that'll be flipped over later. That sounds dodgy. What was I saying? Yeah, in this, she was saying, actually, no, it wasn't Shotpot. It was actually Inside of You with Michael Rosenbaum. But either way, the link will be there. Then they was talking about why she left next gen for a year, and part of her concern was always that she was meant to be this mother, and of course to Wesley rather,
Yeah.
and she never felt she was. She's always written as a doctor, she's always written as a professional, all this stuff, but they never really played the mother side of the character. Like whenever there's issues with Wesley, he'd always go and talk to the male characters for advice, but never went to his mother for
Right.
advice, like
Yeah.
you would in reality. And that's why I like with this, in this show in particular, you don't see Jake seeking the advice of everybody else. He always goes to Dad first
Yeah.
because that's his main, you know, inspiration.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot truer. And so I like that they've learned, A, not to make him this genius so we don't have that trope, but B, you get him to be a more realistic character just by writing him as, a son, not just a
Yeah.
kid, an actual son. And Ben actually has a father, not just his father, but they don't really do anything. So it's nice that they learn that. Uh,
Yeah. It
yeah,
was a nice.
this.
It was a nice scene.
Mm,
I recalled thinking at the time, this is, yeah, this is a nice little scene, and it was good as well to, because you quite often see Jake being, or not necessarily being led astray by Nog, but there's you've got the you've kind of got the slight sort of edge of boredom and the
mm,
temptation thing going on there. And what I liked as well was it gave integrity to
yeah.
Jake, because he was able to sit there and say, actually, no, I am going to do my homework.
Hmm.
I know what you're doing. I know I can see the temptation there, and yes, you're right. I'm thinking of it, but actually, no, I know I need to do
Yeah.
my homework, and it wasn't done in a preachy or didactic way. It was just allowed to be played out as
Normal,
as a normal
realistic thing. Yeah.
conversation, just in that way. So yeah,
Well, this is, again, I know I've said this to you before. Um, and one of the reasons why I love the show is the relationships always feel real. Like everybody, interpersonal relationships between the multiple characters with each other, because obviously Sis got a relationship with Dax, he's got one with Nerys, he's got one with O'Brien, and they're all very different. And of course, then Nerys has got one with him, one with Odo, one with this character, one with that character. And just in real world, everybody's different with everybody else. And it's all nuanced and layered. And just even in the hyper reality of Star Trek, it's still very real. The heart of it is the heart of the show, and it's nice that we're 15 episodes in, and it's really starting to shine now already. Because again, we've mentioned the whole idea that people say, "Oh, you should enjoy it. Don't start watching it till episode season 3 because that's when it gets good." But it's like, well, no, watch this stuff because, I mean, narratively it may not be the strongest stuff Star Trek's ever done, but emotionally and character-wise, it's there's some good core development stuff going on here.
yeah, there's plenty to enjoy.
Mm.
Yeah, that whole thing about not watching something until or it gets good from yeah
X season, yeah,
season 2 or season 3 or whatever. I'm always wary of stuff like that, because I think, well, if then it shouldn't have been allowed to have got to series 3 if it only gets good
yeah.
at series 3.
Mm.
There's got to be
And
something worth watching before that.
and obviously the first few seasons before this point where it gets good are still the building blocks. It wouldn't have got good
Yeah,
inceptively without all this stuff beforehand where they're trial and error working it out. So nothing hits. I mean, I can't think of any Star Trek show, and that includes Strange New Worlds, which is really flavour of the month at the moment, hitting the ground running. I think everyone has certain things that click really into place very
yeah,
quickly. Other bits they still got to work out, and I think that's true of any show. Actually, it's not just Star Trek thing. It's Doctor Who certainly was like that when it first began, and you could argue like that every time they renew production team, renew the Doctor or whatever.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
have a sort of bedding in period.
Yeah, I mean, I can look over onto my Blu-ray shelf there. Like Sons of Anarchy, it took a little while to really become the show it was becoming. You know,
Mm.
you've got to build this stuff. Nothing hits the ground running, but you've got to stick with it because things don't get better initially, without the trudgy bits beginning. You
Yeah,
need to build. But
but
yeah,
also if you don't, if it's something that it's clear you're really not enjoying, then don't
just
don't
stop watching it.
don't flog yourself
Watch something else.
wasting time watching it. Yeah,
Yeah.
just because you think it's something that you need to watch or should be watching.
But yeah,
Which I wonder that happen. I think that probably happens a lot with a lot of kind of Netflix type shows because there's a certain sort of buzz around them. So people I think will end up watching stuff and they sit there for ages thinking, is this any good?
yeah.
Is this any good?
But they're watching it
And
because everybody else is watching it. And
yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Oh, speaking of
Yes.
historical context, I was going to mention this at the beginning, but I forgot. This is more for the viewers than yourself, really. Just to place where we are in recording. It's the 24th of June,
Yes.
2023. Um, the day that it was announced that Star Trek Prodigy has been cancelled. This is the kids show that was on Nickelodeon and Paramount Plus.
Oh
So
right.
apparently it's one of the 4 shows, I believe, that have been cancelled today, and it's going to be also not only is it cancelled, but it's been taken off Nickelodeon and Paramount Plus,
Wow.
which is a bit odd. And obviously, certain fans are, I mean, I've seen comments where like, "Oh, I'm heartbroken. I'm in pain thinking about." It. I'm like, it's a TV show.
Is there something
Sad that it's
particularly
ending, but
offensive about it or wrong about it?
I don't know what's quite happened here. I mean, we don't. The story's not really out. We don't know why.
Yeah.
Obviously, certain shows get cancelled throughout the year because lack of viewers or whatever. So presumably that's what's happened here. And it's not making the money that the execs obviously wanted to make. Which everything's a business.
Yeah,
It
this
is
is
a
true.
business. And but what is interesting, sorry, noise outside, lost my train of thought then. What is interesting is they're in the midst of making season 2. And apparently, what else is in the news is saying they're going to finish doing season 2 and then try and find somewhere who's going to stream it, which is interesting. Because people are obviously hooking on, it's been cancelled, end of the world. But they're not really paying attention to that part of the story that they're still finishing off season 2, which hasn't actually started yet. It's almost finished production. They want to finish post production and everything on it, and then find some streaming service who will take it. Which I can't see why they won't.
Presumably, if they release it on physical media as well,
Well,
then
apparently,
fans will buy
I've
it.
not seen this report, but somebody said they've also cancelled the release of the second season on Blu-ray and DVD. Because they've released, I say second season, part because they've released the first 10 episodes and they're going to release the next 10 because they split season 1 into 2 10-part chunks.
Okay.
Because it's a kids show, so they obviously made 20 episodes, nice mid-season break, have a gap, second half of the season. It makes sense, I
Yeah.
guess. So yeah, I don't know why, but the reason I wanted to mention this is so if somebody watches this in a few months' time or a few years' time, they'll know this important Star Trek day we were recording this on. And people who, if you're watching it like today, which will be Sunday, because I'm not going to make it go live until tomorrow because it takes a while to upload a 4K version, as I found out last week. It took quite a while longer than I expected. The reason I want to mention it is so that people who are focusing on the it's cancelled, end of the world, it's like, yeah, but they're still going to finish the second season. They will find a home for it because obviously all the money's been spent by Paramount, so it'll happen because they're going to want to make their money back. But it's just odd to me that they've taken off Paramount Plus
That is,
since
yeah,
Paramount.
it makes
But then I
sense.
suppose Paramount Plus is not the same as, it's like the BBC. There's different arms. BBC Enterprise is not the same as this part of BBC, and so on and so on.
Yes.
And Paramount Plus is obviously not the same as the people who bankroll the actual show, I guess. But it's still
Presumably Paramount don't have like a children's channel if it's for
no. Well,
kids.
it's on Nickelodeon, so I'm guessing nothing specific.
Yeah.
Because what's really odd is that one of the main driving forces behind Paramount Plus as a streaming service was Star Trek, like the new Star Trek material in particular, and finally having everything on Paramount Plus. So all Star Trek's on Paramount, which obviously makes sense because it's a Paramount bloody property.
Yes.
So it's a bit odd. It's a bit odd.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's going to be interesting to see where this develops. I don't know. It's an odd one. I think it. Some people have said, and I think there may be some truth in this, that this is partly a result of it not being quite kid enough for kids, but not quite adult enough for adults. So it's not quite sure who it's aiming itself at.
Fallen between two stools.
Yeah, because and it's got initially it started off as a very new thing, but then with a holographic Janeway, so that was fine. But I know as the series goes on, Janeway's actually turns up in it properly, looking for Chakotay and so on and so on. So it's become a bit continuity heavy in that way as a sort of sequel to Voyager.
Okay.
So I don't know. Maybe I guess it's probably all kinds. Yeah, money's obviously a factor because Star Trek's a business, which I think fans often forget. You know, yes, it's a creative endeavor,
money
but it's
first and
a
foremost, isn't it?
money-making business, isn't it? You
Yeah.
know, money goes into it. They want to make money back. That's the main goal for people, because obviously, you know, the economy is important. But yeah, so that was today's news. Hey, see, we're doing news now as well.
We are. Yes.
What news we got next week, shall we? Right, back to the scheduled program. I'm also saying that because I think we've more or less covered this episode.
I think we have.
So I thought
Yeah.
I'd throw a news flash in the end of it. Breaking news.
We had poetry.
yeah.
No, we had poetry at the start. We had a proverb
Yeah,
at the start. News at the end.
Yeah, poetry and news. This could be a new thing. We'll start with poetry and we'll end with a bit of news. That could be a new thing. You know, so we have to keep it very topical because the news would be like old history within a week. But yeah, so final thoughts on this episode, not the news.
An episode that seemed uncomfortable along the way, but actually by the end felt very rewarding and enjoyable.
But uncomfortable, so the payoff worked, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. My thoughts are, it's not as daft as I would remember it to be. It's one of these episodes where I'm like, oh, it's one Rob Stilskin. I'm like, but it's actually got some good stuff in it too. It's not just a whimsy episode. It's got some good guts to it. So yeah, so next episode for us and indeed people watching is pretty sure The Forsaken. Let me just double check because I'd be terrible if it turns out I was wrong, wouldn't it?
The Forsaken.
Yes. Oh, he disappeared. Back again. I'm pretty sure it's The Forsaken next because I'm pretty sure I seem to recall seeing that last. Yes. Yes, it's The Forsaken.
Okay.
Any thoughts on that based on the title? I'm not telling you anything else.
No.
I'm surprised they didn't novelise this episode actually.
They novelised it.
No, I'm surprised they didn't know actually.
Oh,
When you think
right.
about it. It's a sort of crossover rerun, you see.
Yeah.
So it could be. But yeah, so that's next week.
Right.
Cool. So, yeah, as usual, viewers, like, subscribe because the more our presence is seen, hopefully the more we can expand the audience and start building and all this stuff. And when we do set up a My Coffee account, which we will do eventually, it can pay for lots of fun stuff that we can put into the show as we get like editing equipment and stuff, and we can actually start doing stuff that all you Utes do. Because us middle-aged men, obviously, we're still working this shit out.
We're nice people, but we're working stuff out.
We're you know, newfangled technology. So yes, In the meantime, you can catch us on the social medias. Obviously, the Replimat is on Twitter at Replimat1, one the digit, which not the two. Don't know why I did that. One. Here we go. I can be found on Twitter not under the name I actually said last week rather, because I'd forgotten I changed it. It wasn't actually Vinja_Dan at all. I remembered after, I was like, oh, that's right, I changed it. It's actually at Frankham-Allen. Of course it is, which makes sense because that's my name. And Tim can be found under...
It's, at Mr_Brell.
Are we sure you've not changed it?
No, I haven't changed it since I set it up.
Okay, cool. Well, he's definitely the same.
Capital M, capital B.
Maybe eventually I think we might set up an Instagram and whatever else as well, because that's also a done thing. But yeah, so in the meantime, if you've got any thoughts about this episode, please do comment below.
Yes, or just tell us that you've watched it.
Yeah, or on Twitter, We're happy to hear from you. We're happy to discuss the episode. I use discuss in inverted commas because you never know. People might have some strong feeling on this one. You never know. But yeah, so we're 15 episodes in. We've got a few more to go before this season's over. And then things get really serious. Just by the way. Anyway, so until next time. I nearly said next week, but that's not a guarantee. But like we said last week, we seem to be on a roll.
We do.
Hopefully next week. But either way, it will definitely be next time, which may be next week, or it may not. Until then, bye-bye from me.
Bye-bye from me.